left some time for some questions. And I understand there are microphones available for those who like to ask questions so that those who are listening in on the webinar can hear as well. So I'll ask you, those with microphones, to identify where you are. And that's okay. I'd just like to start with a quick question. Well, maybe not so quick, but I think, Kim Tallbear was sort of evoked this morning, and some might be a little bit confused about the kind of broad patterns of connected ancestry and more focused notions of cultural identity. And I think both these presentations, both these situations, sort of touch on that. What is the relationship? I wonder if I comment just briefly, the relationship between cultural identity and tribal sovereignty and issues of genetic research and genetic identity as well. Rosita, could you comment?
That's a hard question.
Right.
Well, they are definitely interrelated. When we say Tlingit Ani, we're talking about us as Tlingit people, as a nation, and we say Ha'ani, this is our land. And and this is what it was all about for us, is proving that we've lived in our homeland for 10,000 years or longer. And we arose, and we have our cultural concept of Hashika that unites us with our ancestors and also imposes on us an obligation to our future generations. And so we have to be in command, to be able to do these studies to ensure our cultural survival as Native people.
It's a great answer. I think that the news of this discovery of the ancient boy in Montana didn't really strike too much of a chord with the tribal imagination from my point of view. It wasn't like it was a big revelation or aha moment for tribal people when we told them about this. So I think there's definitely, even though there's a relationship there, I think there's a pretty strong disconnect too. And part of it too is we have such tribal diversity in Montana, there's just 13 different tribes in that small region. So it's difficult to articulate exactly, the overall perception of it, but I think mostly it's almost irrelevant in some ways. I think to me it's relevant in a lot of ways. One of the things that Dr. Willerslev proposes, and what was kind of mentioned in here, but we kind of haven't really touched on, is the Bering Strait theory. And according to Willerslev's theory, his research in his mind proves that the Bering Strait theory is not true. That there was not one group of people who walked over here from the Bering Strait. If there was, then there would still be some of us back over on the other side. To this point, there hasn't been any American Indians discovered except for in America. So, and then you also consider the fact that the genetic history of American Indians is very diverse. Didn't come from just one group walking over here. And so, I think that's an interesting twist too, that probably a lot of people didn't really suspect or see coming.
Sarah, do you want to comment? Okay. Is there a question that
I was going to ask if it's possible to get a copy of your slides, or is it online in any way in an article?
Yeah, I'd be happy to give you a copy of that. Don't know if it's being recorded or disseminated as well. Yeah.
This webinar is being recorded as well, so you can go back and review the content of the slides and on the webinar as well, but I imagine it's going to be published. I understand this question in the back.
Yes, I'd like to thank all of our presenters very much. Jeff Henderson. I'll attempt to make even a little more transparent what is just being discussed now, and that there's a very definite political context to these investigations. I'll have everybody know that this morning during the introduction I whipped up google.com on my phone and put in native DNA controversy. I encourage all of you to do the same thing, and you see what pops up. You'll see references to Clovis Boy, Kennewick Man, the out of Europe hypothesis. The internet is alive with speculation about our DNA. And but what it means is, and this is mostly not us, not we as Native people, with this, all this prominent discussion on the internet, but it's striking that, speaking as a Lakota man, my brother from Montana here, if there's one thing the government has consistently done with us as Native peoples, as members of federally recognized tribes, it's that the government has broke many times over each and every treaty we've ever negotiated with them. And so, in my mind, obviously, non-Native people still think about ancient DNA investigations of our people very much with political ends forward in their mind, whether that's to further eclipse or intrude upon our water rights, subsistence rights, whether it's to play down the amount of our presence in North America and throughout the Western Hemisphere when we were first found, or for whatever the various sundry reasons are. Clearly there's political intent. And so I would invite all of you to, I'd be interested to hear your perspectives on this.
That's a great question. Today, actually last week, I was meeting with members of our delegation trying to get our final Aboriginal land claim settlement. We've lived in Southeast Alaska since time immemorial, or we know for certain 10,300 years. Scientific evidence says that. And we have, we come to our own world with our own cultural concepts, our cultural values, and one of the most powerful concepts we have is our land ownership. And to me, it wasn't ironic that one of our elders said that this proves that we've lived, our studies have shown that we lived in our land for 10,000 years or since time immemorial. But yet today, even despite all of the evidence that we have that shows that we have lived in our homeland for all this time, we are still in Congress trying to get our Aboriginal land settlement. So even with all of the scientific data that we have, all of the research that we've done, where we've analyzed the laws, we've analyzed the history, we've looked at the bombardment of our villages, we've looked at our people who have come to Washington and said, this is our land, we're still fighting that battle. So it's an ongoing political issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. It is an ongoing political issue, and everything is going to be put into a political context, I think, and you'll see that at the national level, you'll see that at the local tribal politics level, and so this kind of research, is going to be really thoroughly looked over so people can take what they want out of it and apply, what they think should be applied to it. In terms of how that affects us today, I don't, personally see, I don't think it's relevant. I mean, I think that whether we were here, it doesn't really matter to me how long we were here. We signed treaties, like you said. And so those are the law of the land. And, those need to be respected and looked at for what they're worth, and they should stand alone. But when you start getting into other issues, like blood quantum, which is a controversial topic, it's probably kind of like the Washington Redskins, you know, it's probably not going anywhere for a while. We're kind of stuck with it, even though a lot of people aren't happy about it. But there's too much of an infrastructure that's been built around it, right? And that's part of what keeps these things in place. What this DNA evidence shows really is that any laws that have to do with American Indian sovereignty tied to biological entanglements should be strengthened, if anything. For example, NAGPRA. You know, you go look at the Anzick study now, well, you can go right back to NAGPRA and say this law needs to be thrown in the trash and redone again, because when they made this law, they didn't know that every single one of us was related. Now we have scientific proof that says that everything in the ground belongs to us, belonged to our ancestors at some point. There's no more, oh, you have to prove this, you have to prove that. We proved it. We proved it with science. That's what they go by, you know, the dominant society. So I don't understand why we can't take a look at these things again and actually make them even stronger for Indian people. But of course, again, there's a lot of infrastructure there that you have to cut through to get to that point.
Please.
Thank you for this presentation, Dr. Anzick. I think it's wonderful that this came to you as a child and you have completed, and you're going to complete a circle that is something that many people should see, and it's wonderful. This really follows what Dr. Henderson said, because it's about policy. And it is current and present in policy, because there are tribes that are under attack through their DNA, and you do have people who do want to use that in courts of law. Water is becoming very precious, and we do have reservations that do have water tables underneath them. And we do have very strong state governments that want access to that water. And because we're migratory people, and because we have maps like you have that show our ancient lands, we are now also in situations where our genetics take a look at where we were in ancient time. And Dr. Anzick's model, for someone to see that, to show that there was no match in the United States for that person, is something that triggers someone who wants something from our people in those places that does not show a relationship, will make them think twice about how perhaps they can get it from us. And as researchers, or as people, native people who participate with these researchers, someone said it earlier, there was a time when we did big science, and we had everybody involved in big science. It wasn't just biologists, it wasn't just cancer researchers. We had everybody involved, and so we had everybody thinking about how we were doing science. It needs to go back to that, because somebody else will think about how we can do it and how we can protect.
Thank you. So, Dr.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very important point, and something that I'm hoping we can see more interaction in the future, more open communication and dialogue, and more involvement as a community. And a study like this actually really did involve a lot of different disciplines, all of which had to come together in the end and, again, complete that full circle. And so I'm hoping that it serves as a model system, you know, for the future, again, trying to collaborate more effectively in terms of genetic research, because it's incredibly important, especially when we talk about health disparities in Native communities. And a lot of it also boils down to education. And so, again, a big collaboration that involves a lot of disciplines. Thanks.
Are there any other questions or comments anyone would like to make?
Everybody, thank you for your presentations today. It's been wonderful to be a part of it. So, can we get some information on this burial ceremony? Is that going to be on the internet at all? I think that I've got some colleagues back in Alaska in the UAF, the University of Alaska Fairbanks Indigenous Studies PhD program, and I know that on the Facebook site that this group would probably really enjoy to honor the time frame and to respect that on the internet if possible. I don't know, it might be more sacred than that in private, but there's an opportunity for them to be thinking about it or lighting a candle or participate in whatever ceremony that they can under some interest.
Yeah, thanks for that inquiry. You know, we've been trying to keep it open for any Indian people who want to attend a reburial on Saturday morning. It's scheduled for 9 o'clock near the site where he was discovered. We're trying to keep it low-key because we had concerns from people in Montana that they didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. And, you know, of course there's going to be media there because we want people to know of this very important story. You know, this has not been easy for either one, Sarah and I, or for anyone involved. And it hasn't been clean, you know, I mean, in terms of trying to figure out how everyone can be satisfied with the way we're going to do things. A lot of people didn't want media there. Some people said they thought it was important. You know, we had ideas of, you know, one of the archaeologists threw an idea in there, he wanted to dig the boy back up every 50 years, and that people could submit research studies. And that, you know, and so then we had to decide that wasn't the way to go. You know, then we considered, you know, keeping portions of the bones out because, you know, maybe 200 years, 300 years or so, you know, they'll have more research capabilities to discover more. Well, we had to nix that too. And so we've come a long ways from where we started with this. We've had to work our ways through a lot of different ideas, a lot of different ways of doing this that would make the scientific community feel like, you know, it was respected. And I know that sounds silly. To me it does, you know, that science is afraid of not being respected. But the fact of the matter is, you know, there's potential information that's being buried. We know that, you know, and then, but on the other hand, you have individuals who are really emotional about this reburial and want it to go, you know, as cleanly as possible. And, so anyway, to answer your short question with a long answer here, if you want to have them email me, if they're interested in coming from Alaska, you know, I know it's a long trip, but they're more than welcome to attend, and I can give them directions and everything else, and Esky Willerstuff will probably help finance their trip, because he's interested in making sure that any Indians who want to come to this will have an opportunity to do that. So just have them reach out to me. I gotta get my iPhone. Anyone got an iPhone charger in here? I got mine back in Montana. Okay, I'm gonna talk to you later.
I just wanted to add a couple of comments. What we did in two of the cases where we had ancestors, we actually gave them, we tribalized them and gave them, humanized them and gave them names. And it was a process of trying to figure out, you know, what the right names would be. And so for the 10,300-year-old person, the On Your Knees Cave human remain, we named Shukaka, a person who came before us. And then on the one that was found on the glacial ice, we named long ago person found. We had, you know, of course, the coastal Tlingits wanted to give him the name Copperstane because we sincerely, truly believe that it's Copperstane. some of the oral traditions that I'm not privy to speak to, really reinforced for us that he was copper staining. But in trying to establish good relationship with our interior relatives, we accepted the name that they had given to him as a long ago person found. And to us, even though in the case of Shukaka, we didn't find any descendants, and I know that there were some scientists who were saying, well, that proves, that you didn't come from this population. And scientifically, we could explain why the DNA wasn't found in the present populations. But to us, on the essence of us as Tlingit people, as Native people, said that he is our relative, and that's aside from anything else. It's just something that lives and breathes with us. So to me, that it really is it helps if you give a name, a tribal name, and make that person a human being, somebody, a living being.
Yeah, I'd like to. Oh.
Well, I was just going to say, I asked Shane, actually, when we embarked on our journey to kind of spread the results. And I said, Shane, wouldn't it be great if we could get a Native American name for Anzick? I was very uncomfortable that it was being referred to as Anzick all the time, because clearly I'm not Native American, so I would love to see that. I like that idea.
I did actually. I like that idea too, and I put it forth to some people that we should name this little boy. And there was some hesitation, and finally, what the message that I got from several people was this boy was already named a long time ago, and he already has a name, and so that's not our business, and so, like she was saying, every community is going to come to these things in a different way, and she just made a beautiful statements talking about how the Tlingit, was willing to go along with this interior people's name, just because they worked it out as a community, right? And that's the way people heal, and that's the way our circles get bigger, I think, and we get stronger together as we confront these things, and rather than letting them divide us, we try to let them unite us. And so I'm hoping that on Saturday that's what's going to happen. And I think eventually when we do build a memorial for this little boy, and there will be a prominent memorial there, and Sarah's working on that right now, trying to fundraise for that. We will have some type of term to recognize him by, even if it's not a name. He needs something that we can kind of attach on to him.
Is there another question?
Good afternoon. I greet each and every one of you. I first want to say, thank you for being here. Thank you for speaking to us. My name is Sasha Rivers, and I am a Winnebago from the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. I also go to school at Sealaska Heritage College in Pueblo, Montana, and with the dreams to go to MSU, so go Cats. To Dr. Doyle, you were talking about there being a fear or something, and I wasn't quite sure, I kind of missed it. I don't understand what you meant with the fear there.
Oh, I just don't like fear. We're not fearful people, and so when people talk to me and they say, oh, we're afraid of this, we're afraid, I don't, somehow it just doesn't sit well with me. We're people who go out in the hot sun and dance for 4 days with no food and water. I don't know if we do that because we're afraid. There's a lot of things that we do in our culture that we don't act out of fear. And so the idea that we would act out of fear and not do DNA research, to me, is unacceptable. And that there has to be some other reason, besides fear, that would drive our actions, because then we're not being traditional. And, you can talk all day about what traditional means. Everyone's going to have a different take on it, but it's not being afraid. That's my personal opinion about that.
So it's about being afraid that Native people don't want to do DNA?
Yeah, I mean, if people don't want to do DNA, I don't have an issue with that. Everyone has their own opinions and can do what they want. But don't say it's because you're afraid. You know, I've got 5 children of my own, you know, and I was raised by, you know, strong people, my grandma. And, you know, being afraid, I mean, that's something to laugh at, to be honest with you. You know, I mean, there's got to be something, there's got to be a better reason, you know. I mean, just say, I don't want my blood taken, not because I'm afraid, but because I want all my blood with me, you know. I don't know. I mean, I just can't accept the fact that these, like I said, these communities are going to let the unknown hold them back. And usually fear is of the unknown. And I think if you can go in there and like what someone else was saying, make sure that every single thing is arranged. We want to have copyrights over anything that comes out of there, and none of this stuff gets shared. I mean, if you set all those things, you know, set up beforehand, then I don't think there's anything really to be afraid of, from my point of view. But then, you know, I guess that's just me talking. But I appreciate your question. My dad's a Winnebago from Nebraska, so I'll have to catch up with you a little bit later.
Absolutely. Well, I just wanted to maybe just throw it out there that perhaps it's not so much fear that keeps people from wanting to do DNA mapping, but their traditional creation stories and having those, maybe a fear of having those disrespected.
And I appreciate that, and I know that I'm going to piss a lot of people off, and that's just, I'm not afraid of that though, right? And so, and if you want to talk about traditional stories, that's fine, you know? I don't have anything against traditional stories, but there's a lot of different ways of thinking about the world. And if you can only view the world through that traditional story, then, you know, maybe you should move over to Iraq or something, hang out with those folks over there, because that's how they operate. You know, everything is fundamentalist, you know, and they don't open their minds to progress or anything like that. And that's not how I see American Indian people. You know, I don't see us as fundamentalists who turn away from things that offer us an opportunity. You know, like Sitting Bull said, you know, he said, look at what's out there. Take what's best and use it. The rest of it, put it aside. You know, so I appreciate that. And I know that people are going to disagree with me. But that's just the way I roll, I guess. I appreciate that.
Is there another question in the back?
First, I want to thank you for sharing your journey, because each of you, in your own way, this afternoon shared your journey with regards to genetics and your community and people. And my question to you is to the genetic and genomic researchers out there. If you were going to give them one piece of advice based on your journey and your experience, as they are doing their work or they are involved in some similar work as you have been historically, what would that piece of advice be?
Patience and understanding. I will say I faced a lot of challenges in trying to engage with communities who didn't agree with work that I felt needed to be done or was important to have done. But to also be open-minded and willing to give. And I think the reburial is a perfect example of that. I feel a huge moral obligation, and I also feel incredibly relieved to finally put this child back to rest. And so I think there's some taking, but there's also got to be a lot of giving, and I think that was opened and addressed early on in terms of making sure those results are given back to the community who are so generous in donating in the beginning. And so I think my biggest advice would be engagement, patience, open communication, and transparency, and also a willingness to accept that you may end up having to give more than you expected to in the beginning, and that's okay.
Another question?
Thank you for everybody that's here, the audience and on stage. My name is Paul Mazzucca, permanent tourist in DC. I have a biology degree, and I'm a tour guide. And I want to talk about two little things in my small life. I don't know, just an undergraduate degree, but I've been pretty much an evangelist for DNA. I want to also put a plug in, besides the genome exhibit on Smithsonian's natural history. Over on American, over down on the first floor of other natural history, there's something on human origins, other hominids that coexisted with us, and the DNA that we all share, things like that. But I'm Italian, Irish, and Catholic. That's my cultural heritage. And got my brother into a discussion. I was taking care of my father with dementia, and we got into a longitudinal study over at Johns Hopkins. Did no treatment, just, I had to explain to my Catholic brother that his dad will still go to heaven after they crack open his skull and pull out the hippocampus and microscope and look at it. And this is good information. We couldn't do a darn thing about that information after we had it, dad was dead. But the point is, what they talked about this morning, you couldn't do anything with the research, but it did add to the body of knowledge. And science is going sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but it's a collective. And then I also wanted to ask about, the question I had was, I understand that all human life extrapolated back DNA from 200 women through mitochondrial DNA in the Horn of Africa. I understand there was a dispute about going across the Bering Strait. It was before my time by a long shot. I wanted to ask about research refuting that, and also and supporting it. And then I wanted to also tell a quick story about, as a tour guide, I take people to Union Station, and I show the statue of Christopher Columbus, and on one side is the Native American, and on one side is the European Christopher Columbus, supposedly the bridge between the old world and the new world. And that's not that long ago. And I have friends in Italian American Native Society that put a little wreath there, and other friends in the Museum of the American Indian to make a cartoon out of it. I just wanted to mention those two things from my experience and ask about the mitochondrial DNA question and where we are all from. Thank you.
So I think the mitochondrial DNA question is, yes, definitely, if you go back far enough in time, we're all related. But I always like to stress the importance of understanding that mitochondrial DNA is just a very, very small portion of that. And we see the example in terms of looking at the Anzick and looking at the 10,000-year-old skeleton, where they say, well, there's no descendants of that. Well, that's only the mitochondrial. It's the full genome that actually gives us a much broader, full understanding of descendancy. And so, yes, I think there is definitely the mitochondria will tell you a little bit about that evolutionary history, and then we all are essentially out of Africa, go way, way back. There's also some mixtures, as we've seen in more recent ancient genomes that have been sequenced. But again, it's the nuclear genome where we get the most information from. Your second question is related to your money.
Population of Southern Africa.
Yeah.
The second question was a story, right? Yeah. Good story. About Columbus. Thank you. I personally think that that's probably true. Yeah, I believe that we probably all did come out of Africa. I mean, I don't understand why that would change anything about the way we see the world today. I mean, to me, there's a lot of different things that make something relevant. And, the fact that we're all related, I think, is the most important thing to remember there. Thank you.
If you have a question, would you please move the microphone so that our webinar folks can hear you? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jill Gillespie from the Geographic Project. And I can't remember if it was this presentation, I think it was, where there was a map of the lower 48 and it was empty. There's no ancestral genetic data that will talk about those stories. So for the non-native researcher working for a project that is very interested in trying to partner with Native Americans for the purpose of populating that map, what do you suggest?
Talk to Eric Green.
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is go over and talk to NCAI. And they have the contacts throughout the whole nation, and maybe they'll allow you to do a presentation or have workshops or something there where you could begin to set up, contacts. But I know they have a good policy center there, and maybe, begin to collaborate with them and make entree into the Native community that way.
And talk to me, because I'm interested in doing the same thing. That's one of the reasons why I'm on the fight today, because I want to get all your blood. Just kidding, just your spit will do. Just your spit will do.
I was gonna approach you afterward. I've been approached, I've been with the project for 7 years, and I've been approached by dozens and dozens of individual Native Americans who have wanted to participate, but they've been prohibited from doing so. So when you said that people should do what they want to do, yes, that's true, but no, they're not.
No, that's a great point. That's a really good point. In fact, when we were in Denmark, we were sitting around a table, and there was a couple guys, and Eski said, well, I'd like to sequence, your tribes. And the one guy says, go ahead, right now, you can have mine. And we kind of laughed, and it's like, well, as Indian people, we love that, right? We pride ourselves on acting as individuals. No one tells us what to do. We're our own people. On the other hand, you've got your tribal community there that also has authority, and so you really have to work with that. And you hit the nail on the head. There are plenty of Indian people out there who are fearless about DNA testing. They don't have any issues with it. That doesn't mean, though, that they can represent their tribe, right? And if you want to represent your tribe, you have to go through the proper processes. You have to see all the necessary people. You have to go to the tribal council. You have to give them a chance to vote on it. You have to tell them the full story of what you're going to do. And so that's the reason why the advice was just given to you, is that go through the proper channels and make all this happen. And then I think those two things will come together. I really believe, like in the case of up in Alaska, where it just made sense to them. That didn't mean, they kept full control over everything, and they still have full control over it. But they did it their way. And I think that if you can go through that process and get people to sit down at the table, then you can have that same opportunity to do what they did.
And the last thing is that the fear is not on the part of the Native American, in my experience, it's on the part of a researcher. Fear of screwing up, and it drives a lot of research. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think we've got to get ready for our next panel, but I want to thank, I for one admire courage, and I'm seeing a lot of courage on the stage today. These are issues that are difficult to talk about, and we all very much appreciate your forthright.